Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon.
I'm Stuart.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. This week, we are going to talk about a particular topic to start with. It's quite a popular topic these days, especially in property training circles, and it is rent to rent. And Stuart, I know you've been working on some new rent to rent deals of late, but first of all, as a fully fledged property owning landlord, why are you now looking at rent to rent?
It's a good question, and the simple singular word answer to that is cash flow. And the reason for that is that, as you're right, in the owned portfolio that I have, probably have pushing 40 odd rooms now, which does provide a certain amount of cash flow, but it comes with quite a lot of cost, including mortgage costs and maintenance costs. What my business needed was an injection of cash flow, but without the capital injection. So typically I work with investors and they will provide sums of money, and spookily enough, they want something in return for investing that money, which comes in the form
That's
of...
a crazy idea. Who would want that?
It comes in the form of interest. So I then have the interest of the borrowing for the investment, also the interest of the mortgage that we're paying. So what I was looking for was a less, I'm going to say less capital intensive. If I'm going to be less corporate about it, I just needed some cash flow that's going to need lower amounts of money to go into the deal. So that's kind of why I started looking at it. It was something I'd looked at about a year ago, and I did have some interest, and I then decided to focus more on the purchase. But as you know, as the property values go up, so does the capital investment. And even when I'm looking at, so my purchase properties are around 85% loan to value on average. So you still need 15%. And if you're buying properties from 200 to 300K, you're still looking at anywhere between 25 to 40K deposit, solicitors' fees, etc., etc. And then typically we'll be doing works on those properties. I've also noticed in the area that I operate in the Southwest, there are more and more properties that are coming onto the market, are stagnating on the market. And the reason for that is that they need investment. So I saw rent to rent as, look, I can provide the solution because I now have the network to be able to do it, in terms of I've got the building teams, I've got good tenant find, I have different tenant managers that can find different tenant profiles. So actually I'm building up a bit of a network that can start solving that problem. And so looked at it again. So hopefully that answers the initial question of why.
Okay, shall I start throwing more questions at you then?
Go on, let's do it.
Okay, so first of all, there are two broad categories of rent to rent, and one is renting a whole property, splitting it up into rooms and letting those as individual rooms, so an HMO, so rent to HMO. The other one is rent to serviced accommodation. So you rent a whole property, but you probably keep it as a whole property. But then rather than renting it by the month on 6 months ASTs or whatever, you rent it by the night. So you're sort of splitting it up into smaller rental portions, and then probably also providing lots of extra services with that. So cleaning.
When you say rent by the night, it sounds slightly more lewd than I think you intend.
Oh dear, yes, that was not what I meant at all.
And I'm definitely not going into that market, just to be clear.
No, indeed. I have heard of SA operators who have been accidentally caught up in that market before. But anyway, that's not what we're aiming for today. So my question is, what are you rent to renting? What's your input and what's your output in your intended deals here, Stuart?
It's a really good question, because you're right. That is the standard model. The standard model of where the margin comes from is you would rent a property that would typically be rented as a residential let, i.e. sold to a single family, single person or a couple, but just on a standard monthly rental. and then you would divide that property up into rooms and rent it by the room, and hopefully therefore increase the monthly rent. However, the market that I'm in is renting from people that already have properties set up as HMOs. So that does make it more challenging, but equally, I hope that means there are fewer people in the market to do.
We should probably explain why that's the case. And this is because the area you're in is actually restricted in as much as you cannot create new HMOs, can you? I think it's in an Article 4 area. Am I correct in that?
You are 100% correct.
Right. So that means if you're wanting to rent out a property as an HMO, it's nigh on impossible to take a non-HMO property and turn it into an HMO. So as your input, you have to start with properties that are already HMOs in order to meet the planning permission criteria in the area.
Yeah. And just for anyone that's interested, because I know there's some geeks out there that do get interested in about it. So I looked into, because when I hear it's impossible, I always think that's not the case, because I'm sure you can. And the truth is, Article 4 direction doesn't mean that you can't. It just means it's very difficult. And they're the words you use. So what we're saying is right. But I did look into that. And essentially what I heard back from the council, and again, every council's different, so this doesn't mean it's the case across the UK, but for the council that I worked with, what they essentially told me is that if there were an HMO property either side of the property you were looking at, there was pretty much a 100% guarantee you could not convert to HMO. Any of the roads that I look at that are all central town, we're all within a mile. You've got no chance of there not being an HMO next to you. In fact, more often than not, there's two. So I just want to be clear for those people that are thinking about it, because Article 4 doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it would be extremely difficult to do it, which is why most of us won't look at it, because it gets difficult. And if you are buying, you don't want to buy and run the risk of buying a property that you want to be an HMO and you convert, for example, but then find you can't.
Yeah, exactly. I think what the Article 4 directions generally do is remove a permitted development. So normally you have that sort of permitted development right to change the use of a property effectively from a single dwelling to an HMO. But in Article 4 areas, that permitted development right has been removed. So in order to change it, you would have to go through a full planning application.
Yeah, you have to go through planning permission.
Yeah, exactly. And that involves submitting lots of paperwork and probably paying a fee and probably going through a council meeting to be approved. And of course, it's basically up to the council's planning commit.
And just to be clear, just because you get planning permission doesn't mean you've got a license. So people need to know that as well, because the reverse would be more true, is that you could get an HMO license on a property that doesn't have planning to be an HMO. And the reason I call that one out is because some people could get caught out by that, where if someone's giving you a property, say, yeah, I've got an HMO license, but if they don't have planning, that's legally not allowed. So just in another sort of catch-22 moment.
Yep, indeed. I think the council licensing departments should check whether the property has planning permission to be an HMO. But
you'd hope so.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to guarantee it.
No, and I certainly wouldn't, actually. I certainly wouldn't, because I've spoken to partners. It probably depends on individual. But anyway, that's another discussion.
Right. So anyway, we got as far as concluding that your inputs for your rent-to-rent deals are already HMOs. So if you're convincing a landlord to let you rent a property as a whole, in order to then split up into an HMO to rent out, so you create your margin there, you're probably looking at renting it at a sort of single property price and then renting it out to your tenants at that higher split up rate. But you're renting properties that are already HMOs. So surely you can't be paying that HMO rate, that sort of per room rate, or your math just wouldn't work. So how is this planning out? How is this panning out for you?
Well, obviously, I think if you're a landlord and you're entertaining a renting it out on a guaranteed rent, because that's what we offer, So we'll guarantee the rent for a number of years, typically 3 to 5. I'm looking more at the 5 end. Then there is a fixed term. So the first thing that the landlord gets in return is they know that they're going to get that fixed rental. But to your point, those that are considering that are going to be properties, as we said at the start, that aren't fully occupied. So there's going to be challenges with them. And it could be that they've always held a certain tenant profile, let's say student, and they're not in the prime location now for students, which means they're going to have to transfer to workers. And it may just be that they haven't solved that problem, like I said earlier on. So what I will do is I'll look at the property, and it could be that a number of rooms just aren't occupied of those. So typically the properties we're looking at are, I would say, smallest number of rooms is 4 or 5. And we'll find that 2 of those rooms aren't occupied. So we will then calculate based on, and in fact, I don't calculate based on those empty rooms. I actually give them an allowance and just say, okay, let's just assume you've been unlucky, and I'll give you a very sort of low room rate, and I'll approximate what the room rate would be for them, but I'll take out all of the costs. So essentially, I show the landlord what they're actually getting on that property, and I will make what I consider a very fair offer based on that, and on the fact that not only will they get a net rental amount from me, but my company will take on all of the costs. Obviously, there's a caveat to that, which we'll come to, but my company will take on all of the costs, i.e. utilities, low-end maintenance, and council tax. So when the landlord gets a payment, the only thing they have to worry about if it's a mortgaged property is that mortgage, which, because I play both sides of this fence, I see the benefit of that. And I too have looked at rent to renting before I decided to do it myself. I looked at it because sometimes just to think, actually, I've got nothing to think about. Someone's just going to give me some money at the end of the month. And that company has to worry about whether rooms 1, 4, and 7 are full, not me. I'm just going to take my money every month. So that's the benefit of offering what we offer.
Yep. So you've covered it a little bit, but I think there's probably more to it. How is your offering as a rent-to-rent package different from just a letting agent who says, pay me a percentage of the rent and I will fill your rooms, and that's it, and I'll handle the queries and the inquiries from the tenants and take it effectively off your hands, but it's an agent setup. How is that different from a rent-to-rent setup?
Well, the big difference is it's not guaranteed rent. So the agent will take their fee, whatever that is, let's say 10% plus VAT. So typically, on average, it'll be a 12% rate. But if you've only got 4 rooms filled out of 5, obviously your rent amount that month is going to be lower. And the agent will still take their 12% of the total rent revenues of the 4 out of 5. Our offering, the rent-to-rent offering, is very much a fixed rent service. So for the sake of argument, if we say we'll pay you £1,000 a month for the next 5 years, that's exactly what you get. And if 1 room is occupied or 5 rooms occupied, the landlord's rent amount does not change. So that's the major difference. Whereas obviously, if you're just using a standard agent, that rent's going to fluctuate if you're not filling those rooms.
Cool. And from your point of view, you're not setting yourself up as an agent in this situation as well, are you? You're looking at having other people sort of on the ground do the day-to-day management of the property. So you're very much looking at it as a different approach to being a letting agent, yes?
Yeah, although it's an interesting point because it's something we are looking at, because my company is taking on, without getting too technical, it's like a management lease. So my company is in effect the agent as well as the tenant, if you like. But then, of course, we are subletting, which makes it. And the tenant, so at the moment, it will be my company that acts as the agent, and we employ a tenant manager.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I was thinking sort of from the point of view of you personally, you're not going to be taking on the agent roles. But yes, of course, you're not contracting an external agent. You're contracting another person within your organisation to do those.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, you're right. So I personally am not undertaking that. I can do, but it's not where my best skill set lies. So, like I said, I've got a good network now of individuals that I've worked with for a good few years now that will become part of the company. Well, sorry, are part of the company, and others that will become part of the company, hopefully as we grow. And we've just agreed a relationship at the moment with a really good landlord who made some very quick decisions. I've worked with a few recently where they wanted personal guarantees and excessive contracts, and we've had a contract written, so we do everything above board as you'd expect. But they then wanted personal guarantees, and my sort of question was, what are we guarantee? What do you want me to personally guarantee? Well, we want you to guarantee the rent. I said, well, but that's the model. I mean, I appreciate not everyone says what they're going to do, but this is a rent guarantee model. If I didn't do that, then my business wouldn't last very long.
Yeah, quite. I mean, if you don't manage to deliver, then you end up losing the property.
Yeah.
So yeah. So before we dig into the details of this particular deal that you've arranged recently, how have you been going about finding these deals? What's been your process and approach to locating the properties or the landlords?
Well, there's two routes that I've used so far. One has been word of mouth, where a couple of the letting agents that I've worked with and developed quite good relationships with, when they haven't been able to fill a room and they've got a good relationship with the landlord, they've put him or her onto me. So we've been able to have those conversations. And the other route is via the HMO license list. So of the license that we talked about earlier on, I am on that register too as an owner in that council. There is a list which you can gain access to.
Yeah, it's public. I don't think it's publicly published, but it is sort of public data, isn't it? So you can contact the council and request it.
Yes. Yeah. And again, some councils give it for, you can ask for access to it and they'll just provide it. Others, I'm sure most of them now will just ask you for money.
Yeah, I think some councils actually publish it openly on their websites, but yeah, I think most you have to contact and specifically request it.
Yeah, I mean that's my experience, is that I've had to specifically request the list, and then I'm able to find the landlords and hopefully reach out to those that are amenable. And to be fair, I've had a number of conversations with people that have been really good about it. But as with any business, not all leads draw to conclusion, because the challenge with some of these, and what I've really enjoyed about it, Simon, actually speaking quite candidly, is there's a couple of landlords where I went to view their properties and I came out of it and I said, look, this could be a rent-to-rent option and I could offer it to you. I said, but what you need to do, I said, if I'm going to be, and this is how I work, I just said, all you need to do is fix X, Y, and Z, and this property would probably be much better for you. And they said, well, but would you take it on? And I said, look, I would take it on and I will take it on, but I'm just telling you these are the challenges you've got with this property, and this is why you're not renting it.
Mm-hmm.
And that bit I've quite enjoyed, meeting landlords, and it's quite nice to be able to go out and help people. And when you get into sort of rhythm of doing that, where I go out and just think, okay, I'll just go out, and there's one that I'm working with at the moment where I've sort of said to her, look, the reason this isn't renting is because, and it's not rocket science. It's, there's a hole in this wall. this hallway needs repairing. And I said, to be honest, for my business, it's too much, because we're looking at, I'm just plucking numbers out of the air, but let's say it was 10 to 15K. And I said, look, there's 10 to 15K. I think that's what you need to spend to get this into a reasonable position. And actually, I know people that can quote that for you, and I'm happy to put them in your path. And I've done that. The interesting thing is, the landlord in this case still came back to me and said, look, I've quoted it, but would you still like to take it on under these agreements? So for me, there's an enjoyment around just being transparent and trying to help people, because I think people sort of grow towards that if they see that you're not just trying to make a quick couple of quid, that actually you're just trying to solve problems. And hopefully that's what rent to rent is. And this is the first one. It's quite a big one. So I really want to, well, I've done others, but not quite as big as this. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, this is the first one in your current batch, isn't it? So
yeah.
So yeah, let's dig into this particular deal then. What's the property like, and what are you doing to the property to make it ready for your new tenants, and what's your aims with it?
Well, the interesting thing is it's in the same street in which I own 3 properties already, and it's in the same street. It's almost directly opposite a property that I'm refurbing to a 5-bed, 5-ensuite. So,
which is another one we need to catch up on soon. But, not today.
Not today. But to get the decorators to cross the street is not a huge push. It's a sort of property. Well, it's in a street where I own 3 properties, so it's a street I like. It's a Victorian property, probably a turn of the century, 1900s property. It's 8 bedrooms. It's just one of those where I wouldn't say it's in bad condition. It's a good property. It just needs decorating in certain areas. It just needs a little bit of added T&C. It's one of those that probably last got decorated in anger in the early 80s. So a lot of chipboard artexing type stuff, which so really we're just going to give it a lick and a spit, really. I've got people going in there today and tomorrow to just brighten and freshen it up, really. And we've then got our eye on a market of workers that we'll go to, and we've already got some interest. So yeah, I mean, typically it's 8 bedrooms. There's no ensuite bedrooms. There's a bathroom on the ground floor, shower room on the ground floor. Then there's a bathroom on the first floor. So it's one of those types of buildings. But generally, it's in fairly good condition. As mentioned earlier, it's probably more around the fact that it would have been typically a student let, and therefore that's the only market that the letting agent focused on. And the market for students in this area has contracted slightly, so it probably now just sits just slightly out of the student market. Unless it were a more top end product, I don't think students would go there, and that's where having access to different markets helps.
Is it coming to you empty?
No, so we are taking a couple of tenants, and we've already discussed with them what's happening, and because it's one of those where we're getting into the handover, and we could have asked them to leave, but A, we don't necessarily need them to leave, and B, given the current environment, you wouldn't be able to get anyone moved for 6 months anyway. But that's not how we operate. I've already developed a bit of a rapport with the existing tenants and just told them that this is what's happening. And being brutally honest, I don't think they've had very much communication from the existing agents, because even recently I just send messages to say, oh, this is happening today or that's happening tomorrow, usually within 24 hours notice. And I just keep getting messages back saying, oh, thanks. I really appreciate this notice. And when I've previously notified the agent before I had their contact details, they were never aware that I was coming on the day I was coming. So I just said, like, just give me your contact details. So of the tenants that are there, a couple are students. So I've just been very clear with them what's happening. Just said that we are going to get workers in. It should be fine, but we just want to let you know, because typically we wouldn't mix those 2 profiles, not for any insidious reasons, but just because generally when you've got households together, you want them to be similar, whether that's age, demographic, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, students tend to live quite different lifestyles, don't they, to younger workers, and they may not mix. Cool. So to try and round it off, then let's talk a little bit about financials. How much are you actually putting into this property? So I mean, you said you're looking at low capital in order to help boost cash flow. but there's never, or very rarely, zero capital. And you've mentioned you're having to do redecoration and put a bit of polish on it. So what's your rough sort of upfront investment in this rent to rent?
Yeah, unfortunately on this one, I can't share the exact details, but in terms of the cost we'd be looking at, a few £1,000s, I would say, would cover the costs of what we're doing in terms of the decoration. We also will replace all of the mattresses. In fact, they've already gone. So mattresses, beds, and then we'll start getting furniture in, wardrobes, bedside tables. And again, we'll work on that in terms of as cost efficiently as we can, but providing the look. So I would say that initial investment could be anywhere between 3 to 5k, and that is a real sort of ballpark in terms of what I would expect. It's not the actual numbers on this project, but that's what we would be looking to do. Then, of course, we have the utility costs that we're taking on to get all that fixed. So you're right, you're looking a lot of upfront cost. But how we look at this, again, if we think back to the start of the conversation, and if I were to buy a property, and I bought in that street, I'm looking at anywhere between 50k to purchase the property. So 40 to 50k just to buy the property. And then even if I'm going to give it a buff and a fluff, let's just say I'm all in for somewhere around 60, 70 if everything's gone well. And that's conservative, I would say, based on what I know I've spent in that street. So 60 to 70,000 pounds for X amount of cash flow. Of course, you've then got the capital asset and you've got the appreciation, etc., versus somewhere between, let's say, 5 to 7k upfront costs, but then the income for the next 5 years. And I'm very open with the landlords, and I say to them quite clearly, look, I probably won't make money on this for 6 to 12 months because that's the model and that's how it works. So, because whenever we get into conversations about how long, I always explain to them, look, the way this model works is I take on your risk up front of doing the things that you haven't yet done. And you then benefit from getting the fixed income. I will then benefit from this longer term, probably after 1.5 to 2 years, where I'm then making cash flow. But we both benefit because I'll get some cash flow. You get consistent cash flow, which is more than you were getting before. And that's how it works.
Yeah, indeed. You're looking at 10% or something of your purchase kind of investment. So you're much lower initial capital involved, but there is some. You've still got to put money in to get going. And then, of course, that's going to take a while for that repayment to come back to you.
Yeah.
So we are pretty much out of time. Is there anything we've forgotten to talk about that you think's particularly important to rent-to-rent deals in general, or this particular rent-to-rent deal?
No, I think the important thing for me is, as always, rent-to-rent is like any business. Unfortunately, you talked about it at the start, that it's quite a prevalent thing. And I think rent-to-rent, like other property strategies, are mentioned as these really simple silver bullets for cash making. But like anything that I've encountered in business, it takes time and effort and, yes, money. And it might be that you can use other people's money, but it will still take time and effort. And other people I know that are doing this and have done it well for at least 3 to 5 years talk about the difficulties of it and the difficulties of making money, because you're always working on a tight margin. So I guess I'll wrap it up by saying I don't expect this to be necessarily the cash cow that's going to cure all of my ills, the panacea for all of my problems. I know there's time and effort, and that's the thing is that I want to be clear that it's going to be hard work. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but hopefully will mean that we've got some cash flow coming in once it's all set up. But of course, the risk is keeping the rooms full. So, but I think we've covered it off, and you touched on that.
Cool, fantastic then. In that case, it just leaves me to say thank you very much to everyone for listening. Please do let someone else know about the Business of Property podcast and point them in our direction. You can find show notes at thebusinessofproperty.com, and we will talk to you again next week.